Our guest is in the studio, the ambassador of the United States to Kenya. Sometimes people call her Kenya's chief marketing or investments officer and ambassador to the U.S., Margaret Meg Whitman. Good morning, Balozi.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Happy to be here.
How does it feel?
Feels good.
Mm-hmm. Karibu sana. What do your friends call you? Can we call you Meg?
You can call me Meg.
Ah, good. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you.
City here has the day's proverb. Every week, City goes to one African country. He's a researcher. So he researches the best proverbs in that country. Then he brings us one proverb a day. Now, your job, number one, is to listen to the proverb. Job number two is to give us your interpretation of the proverb. Okay?
All right.
City.
Yes.
This week we are in?
We're in the Republic of Malawi, but I will certainly not call Her Excellency Meg. That will not.
What will you call her?
Your Excellency.
Okay.
It is only when the flood is gone that you can claim to be lucky.
It's only when the flood is gone that you can claim to be lucky.
Yes.
What's your interpretation of this proverb?
Well, thank you for that, and it's great to be here. I think what that proverb is trying to say is when the flood is gone, you see what's really left. And sometimes it's only you and your family, and you have lost all your possessions. And so sometimes you realize that you can be lucky to be alive and to have a very small number of things. And sometimes we get caught up in the materialism of the world, but when the flood is gone, what really matters is still left.
So what's the lesson?
Lesson, be grateful for what you have and be resilient.
Great. It's a good one. So Kenya and US are marking 60 years of diplomatic ties, and this will be marked by a state visit by President William Ruto to America to be hosted by President and Dr. Jill Biden. Why a state visit? What's the difference between a state visit and the other visits that President Ruto himself and other presidents have had to the U.S.?
Yeah. So the state visit is really the highest honor that a country and a head of state can have. And it has all the formalities of a dinner at the White House, what they call a state dinner. Then there is obviously a bilateral engagement between the cabinet of the United States and the cabinet of Kenya in this case. And there is a very formal welcome ceremony. And then lots of interactions with other branches of the government and the people of the United States. So it's very formal. And really a very big honor for the Kenyan people.
So how big is it of a difference between what this visit is going to be versus the others? For example, President Uhuru Kenyatta had several visits to the White House and to the president.
Yes, but I don't think he had what we call a state dinner.
Okay.
At the White House, there'll be 300 to 400 people from a broad cross-section of Americans, a broad cross-section of Kenyans, and the diaspora. By the way, you know there's a very large number of prominent Kenyans who are now Kenyan Americans, and many of them have been invited. And so that is a very formal and a big honor. When a normal visit to the United States by any head of state never involves a state dinner unless it is a state visit. And just to give you some perspective, this administration has had just 5 state visits in their first 4 years, and this will be the 6th and final one in his first term.
So when you consider relations between two states, any two states, what would be the significance of something like this? And so let's look specifically then at the US and Kenya. And to say then, like you said, other visits have taken place between President of Kenya and presidents of the United States, but a state visit, what's the significance of this in the relations between the two countries?
I think it really does 2 things. It underscores the strength of the relationship between Kenya and the United States. You know, we've been working together for 60 years on regional peace and security, on trade and investment, on shared, now recently, climate solutions. And this has been quite a tight working relationship for many years. It's had its ups and downs, like every relationship, but it has been a very solid relationship. And I think it is an acknowledgement of that relationship on the occasion of the 60th anniversary, if you will, of the partnership. And it will have the highest level of the United States government really focused on this, and we will discuss a lot of issues that are important to both countries.
How would you define or describe U.S.-Kenya relations or the relationship today?
I would say, in a word, it is excellent. It is deep. It is broad. As I said, it spans from regional peace and security to trade and investment to a health partnership. We've been working with the Kenyans on health, malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS for many, many years. Digital and technology cooperation. I think one of the reasons I was asked to be the ambassador to Kenya was because of Silicon Savannah. Today, Kenya is the technology capital of East Africa and actually probably the technology capital of the entire continent. And we will talk about that and the digitalization actually of the continent. And I should also say I think this is a recognition of the importance of Africa to the United States. Kenya is the country that's being honored, but it is I think it's a recognition that Africa is a very, very important continent, certainly to the world, but particularly to America in the next 20 years.
Why?
Well, as you well know, by 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will live in Africa, and 1 in 3 working-age people will live in Africa. So it's going to be the locus of population. It will be the youngest population. Therefore, it's with the working age, and it will be the largest consumer market in 2050. So that makes everyone need to stand up and say, what are we going to do with Africa?
Right. Meg, I've watched many of your presentations so far in many events, and you go very, very big on saying, why Kenya, why Africa? I don't bother about the other Africa bit, I just bother on what you're saying about why Kenya. And you're big on those things and saying the future, the kind of society that we have, the education, the opportunities, the everything about Kenya, and then why American companies should come and invest here. What I've noticed is that that's why I say you are marketing Kenya to American companies to say, come and invest in this country. A marked difference from your predecessors. We're used to American ambassadors coming to Kenya and going gung-ho on democracy, on the rule of law, on corruption, and dangling the aid carrot and saying, so we're going to give you aid, or we're going to withdraw aid, or we're going to suspend aid because you're not doing this and the other, and threatening sanctions to some political leaders or players and business people not to visit America because of one reason or the other. You've not done that. Is this your brief or is this your style?
Probably a little bit of both. When I was asked to come, as I said, it was really my technology background that I think the President of the United States thought was a very good match for Kenya. But you also have to remember, I'm not a career Foreign Service officer. I am actually a business person. I spent my entire 40-year career running companies. And I didn't know much about Africa. I'd been here on business, but I had not lived outside the United States before, and had certainly been to Kenya, but only probably 3 or 4 times on business. And what I understood here almost immediately was the potential of this country. And I think, frankly, what Kenya and Africa needs the most is jobs, jobs, jobs. Good jobs for young people. Today there's 1 million college graduates in Kenya, I think, every year, about 300,000 of which get jobs that are befitting, if you will, of a college graduate. So there's tremendous talent that's underutilized, and Americans are looking for places to invest, looking for supply chain diversification. If we learned anything from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we learned that having a single source supply chain, a single country, is probably too risky. And so there's lots of companies that are looking to go someplace else. And guess what Kenya has that they want? Really great workforce and 93% renewable energy, because every company is trying to get to zero net emissions to get to their Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions goals. So supply chain diversification and green energy is a wonderful calling card for Kenya, and we hope we can improve foreign direct investment and create more jobs.
Does this mean America is now less concerned about corruption and governance issues in the country?
Well, corruption, as I have said in many speeches, corruption is still an issue here in Kenya, and what I have said is if corruption is not gotten under control, it will be the reason that Kenya does not fulfill its full potential. And so we have very frank discussions about corruption, and we try to support an anti-corruption agenda with the government and the country. But ultimately, it's up to the Kenyans to decide that this is something they really want to tackle.
Is there a balance of relations between Kenya and the U.S.? And when I ask that because are we looking at both countries seated at the table with equal tools with which to operate this relationship? Or are we seeing that the US is big brother to Kenya and is leading the way?
Well, I think it's actually quite an equal partnership on a lot of dimensions. So first of all, the United States is the largest export market for Kenya, I think next to Uganda. Last year we were bigger than this year Uganda, I think, took the first spot again. But we are the largest export market, which gives Kenyans a very big seat at the table. And then in the health partnership, yes, we provide technology and know-how and some financials, but the Kenyans implement what has been a remarkably successful PEPFAR program here. I would say that has been one of the hallmarks of our 60-year partnership. So, yes, the United States is a much bigger economy.
Indeed.
But I would say, and regional peace and security, you're leading the way there. We're, behind the scenes trying to help. So I'd say it's quite equal. Probably the advantage that America has is a much bigger economy.
Speaking of PEPFAR, CT?
Yes, you saw the movement of my hands.
Yes.
What I've often marveled at is why it is the U.S. doesn't harp loudly enough about what PEPFAR has done. I speak as somebody who worked in programs that were funded by PEPFAR, and I witnessed firsthand what it did, and I have never seen anything that has been as transformative.
Yeah.
We have AGOA, very good, yes, business, yes. But the devastating effects of HIV were so cataclysmic,
Yes.
so absolutely horrific that when you have one program, just one, that injects not just expertise, but continuous hand-holding and continuous money that ensures that not only do you get remedial care, but you continue to receive the appropriate measure of care that you need for not a decade, decades. Now,
For the rest of your life.
yes. Now that I do not know of any intervention, even when I look at other countries on the planet, that you can actually compare with it. Why don't you harp about it? Why don't you? Why doesn't the U.S. talk about this thing and whistles and bells and the whole works? Because even to date, even when we say that we have more or less understood it and it's under control, some of the biggest support that the Ministry of Health in this country gets comes from there.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that, because I think it is one of the, if not the most successful United States government programs ever in the history of the United States, working with other countries. And we just finished celebrating the 20th year of PEPFAR in Africa, and there's been over 24 million lives saved. And there are people who are living very productive lives on retrovirals, for the rest of their life.
Yes.
And there's been a whole infrastructure that's been built up for the
Yes.
delivery of these medicines, which, by the way, came in handy in COVID.
Yes.
And if there's ever another pandemic, that infrastructure that's been built will be very important. And I think we do talk about it some. We talked about it on the 20th anniversary. But I think America, perhaps we don't, quote unquote, market ourselves very well. And I think it's because we are happy to be able to do what we have done. I think we understand that many people in Kenya and other countries of Africa understand what has been done. But I'm not sure it's in our nature to brag about that kind of thing. And, interestingly, when I came, often you would go to events that were put on by the World Food Program or UNICEF.
Yeah.
But there would be never anything about the United States. And you probably know we're probably 80% of the funding of the World Food Program.
Yes.
And probably 40 or 50% of UNICEF. But we often hang back and let the World Food Program and UNICEF lead forward. And I think it's, we could have a debate about whether it's the right thing or not, but I think, there's a humbleness about it, which I appreciate.
On a planet where bad news travels faster than everything else, and the influence of the U.S. is felt literally everywhere, good news should take precedence.
Feedback.
Yes. Having said that, this is something that I've often wanted to ask, and I'm glad you're here. What would you say is the U.S. policy for Africa?
I'd say the first thing is, particularly under this administration, I think President Biden has recognized the future importance of Africa, the demographics that you and I discussed, that America needs to pay more attention to Africa as a trading partner, as a regional peace and security partner. And, in life, half the battle is showing up. And I think for many years we did not show up as we might have on the continent. And really under this administration, we have showed up in a much bigger way. The African Leaders Summit, I think, in fact, me being asked to go to Kenya in some ways underscores that. And so I think the strategy is we're going to show up. We're going to do everything we can to offer Kenyans and other African countries a choice of who you do business with, who you do regional peace and security. So it's not you can only do business with us or only work with us, but we need to have a set of offerings that is more attractive than perhaps our geopolitical competitors.
So Kenya's biggest export market is, of course, USA.
Yes.
We've got the AGOA,
yes,
the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, which is coming to an end, and we'll have a conversation about what happens thereafter.
Yes.
But do you think Kenya has actually optimized the AGOA opportunities?
Well, AGOA has
maximized.
It has. It's been a big success here, as you know. I think it's increased 12 times in the last 10 years. The amount of exports to the United States under AGOA, it's well over $500 or $600 million today. Probably the biggest beneficiary has been the apparel business. That has been an enormous success story. And by the way, apparel is a big employer, so that's important. But there are many, many more categories. I think there's over 900 categories that you can export duty-free to the United States under AGOA, and Kenya has not taken advantage of all 900 categories. And one of the things that when AGOA gets renewed, which I believe it will, I want to sit down with Rebecca Miano at the Ministry of Industry and Trade and say, okay, what are the next 20 or 30 categories that Kenya could really take advantage of? Many of that would be agriculture. I think there's technology. There's many other categories. So I think it's been a big success, but not fully utilized, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah. In fact, the conversation that I had, Rebecca Miano was saying yesterday, that yes, we have actually not done enough, and we should look at what we could do to expand. Why do you think we haven't done enough? Is it a lack of opportunities? Is it lack of awareness?
I think it's lack of awareness. It's perhaps lack of an economic focus for the government of Kenya. I mean, I think Rebecca has this, the list of all 900 categories in front of her, and she's saying, okay, what can Kenya do uniquely better than anyone else, and where is the momentum that we can build on? So I think she's right, and I think there's quite a bright future here. And by the way, in the United States, when people question the renewal of AGOA, they never question, does it work and is it great for the African countries and things, but they say, why hasn't it been utilized more? I was back in the States about a month ago, and I had a number of conversations with Congress, and their only question was, why is there not more utilization of this? So I think we have to work hard together to utilize more categories to the benefit of Kenyans and, frankly, to the benefit of the Americans.
There have been ongoing trade talks between Kenya and the USA. I don't know what stage they are at right now.
Yeah.
You can tell us about that. And so how do those play with AGOA's renewal?
Yeah. Well, they're two separate things, because AGOA is for the entire African continent. Not every country is eligible for AGOA, but most are. And then there is what's called the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is only between Kenya and the United States. And it would be the first strategic trade and investment partnership between an African country and the United States. And so we want to do AGOA for the continent, but this is about how do we maximize trade between our two countries. And it's coming along. These things are quite technical and quite detailed. And I'd say we're probably 30 to 40% of the way through. I had hoped that we would get this done before the state visit, but we were not able to get it done. There's good progress. We'll talk about that at the state visit. I expect it will be done by the end of the year at the latest.
The underlying issue that could respond to the question of why it is all the tenets of AGOA have not been utilized or taken advantage of lies in just one word, corruption. You see, when corruption is a fundamental business within a country, the entrepreneurship mentality that is required to take such advantages does not take center stage. What takes the prevailing stage is corruption, because people pursue it with the same vigor and energy as they would pursue actually structured business,
Yeah.
such as the opportunities that are offered by AGOA. So, even as there is this partnership, the questions that will continuously be asked is, what is it that this partnership is doing to ensure that those in leadership understand the need for accountability and the need for them to ensure that there is a concerted, visible effort to stamp out this one bane, this one burden that prevents this country from actually moving forward fast in the direction that it could.
Yeah. So I agree with you. As I said, I think that's one of the biggest issues facing Kenya. And by the way, it's not just Kenya, right? This is true in many, many parts of the world. And it is a very difficult and intractable problem because it's been going on in many countries for so long. And so I think we have very frank conversations with the government on this. We have a number of programs. I have two very senior, what we call assistant U.S. attorneys here that are helping with the court system, you know, doing capacity building. We have a number of programs. But in the end, I think the Kenyan people need to decide that this is something that they really want tackled. And by the way, I think the media has a role to play in that. And I think that the government, you know, has got to take a firmer stance on this.
I mean, far be it from us to have a political conversation, but if we look at the jurisdiction where you hail from, when we look at things that often would go wrong, according to the people's choice, we don't hear silence, that people speak up. There's a huge lobbying capacity and practice in the US. There is a systemized way of doing things, for which in many cases corruption is frowned upon. And if we're talking about the one big impediment to development here, we're looking at corruption. We can't run away from that. And we are at the same time saying that there's a relationship between the two. Would you encourage that kind of thing where the citizen's voice then rises up and speaks to its government to hold it accountable?
So America has a history, as you say, of fighting corruption. It's easy to forget. Do you remember the mafia in the 20s and 30s? I mean, this was enormous corruption, and it was what we called organized crime. It wasn't crime, it was organized crime. And it took a number of years to fight this. It took courts, it took people, it took the government, and finally we overcame that. But every country, and by the way, there still is corruption in the United States from time to time, right? We see that. So this is a journey that will never end, in my view. And so I think the question for Kenya is, how can you accelerate that journey? And what can you do as the media? What should the president be doing? What should the country be doing to really tackle this?
Do you think the people's voice should be amplified when it comes to this? Keeping leaders accountable?
I do.
Are we going to a break?
I know you have conversations from time to time with President William Ruto. Do you talk about these issues of corruption?
You know, I have frank conversations with the government up and down. I meet with many people in the government. And by the way, so do many other heads of mission here. It's a very strong group of ambassadors here, particularly from Europe and Australia. But we do focus on other things, as you know, most of the time on other things, whether it's regional trade, whether it is regional peace and security, whether it is job creation here. And what I will say, you mentioned that corruption may be the one reason that other parts of AGOA are not taken advantage of. That's probably true. But also, when you go after an industry like technology or apparel, you have to have a really dedicated strategy and a focus. I'm a big believer in focus. And so if Kenya decided they were going to go after the apparel business and look at what it is today. The president was just out at Ati River announcing 20,000 new jobs. And they're good jobs. They're well-paying jobs, 3 meals a day, daycare, medical clinics. So you have to go after a sector. BT Cotton. Cotton, as I understand it, used to be a big business here.
Yes, it was.
And fabric is important for the apparel business. Right now, all the apparel companies import fabric from Tanzania and I think other places. And so bringing back the cotton industry is very important. So how do you do that? You got to say, well, okay, we're going to go try to find 250,000 acres of cotton. Who could do that? Homa Bay, Kakamega, Kilifi, and then you've got to, help them get the seeds and organize that. It won't necessarily happen by itself, not because of corruption, but because it needs sort of a catalytic function.
Okay. Wazir, you came under fire
Yes.
Last year, when you made certain comments about this being the election that took place then being one of the fairest or most transparent. And, whether you heard it or not, the speculation was real. Would you stand by the same sentiments or the same comments that you made about that time, regardless of what anybody said after that?
I would.
Okay.
I would stand by.
Why?
Because by all reports, not because of what America said, but there was well over 1,000 election observers here. There were independent groups who made those comments. And from what we saw and what those groups saw, this was a free and fair election. And I think, listen, I ran for governor of California, so I understand politics.
Yeah.
And people said, weren't you, upset or hurt? And I said, well, relative to what I endured running for governor of California, on a scale of 1 to 10, that was a 1. And what I encountered in California was a 10. So it's politics. And you probably saw I had a meeting with Ryla not too long ago. I have a great deal of respect for him. I'm excited about the potential of his, potentially running the AU. And that's good for East Africa, probably good for Kenya. So we had a very nice conversation, and I have a lot of respect for him.
So there's also been talk about America is actually doing all these things because they realized that this whole conversation about good governance, corruption, and talking like the big brother to Kenya has actually made Kenya face east and to the detriment somehow of America. Do you think this is now a move that will say, look, we actually are partners and not necessarily looking at you as, small brothers, but we are partners in life? And then what do you say about Kenya's diplomatic relations with the other countries, Russia included?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I don't think we have, I think you used the word made Kenya face west. That is not at all what happened. I mean, there's completely Kenya's choices. And as I said earlier, I think our objective, my personal objective here, is to work with the United States government policy and resources to give Kenya's choice. And, listen, there are lots of actors here. I think Kenya will interact with many of them. And we just want to make sure that we're showing up with, something that you want to do business with, that we're a country that you want to align yourself with and you want to do business with, whether it's regional peace and security or trade and investment or people-to-people ties. And so my view is, I come from the private sector. We have to be more competitive. We have to be a better offer than other people. So it's not a coercion in any sense of the matter. It's we want to be a better offer.
For the business to thrive, then Kenya needs to be able to have the money to be able to run.
Yes.
Okay. So if you look at the last years of the years under the Jubilee administration, Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, there was a lot of, borrowing and saying we need to bring in money so we can expand our infrastructure. And that's why they were going to the commercial market, facing east, talking to China and such. Is there an opportunity for Kenya to have such kind of financial relations with America, where we say that, yes, there's many projects that are coming, going to be financed long-term by American government so that you can accelerate the infrastructure so that also American companies can come and invest?
Sure. So we tend to, unlike other countries, we tend to rely on our private sector to make the investments. And whether that is a highway or a road or a factory, we tend to rely on our private sector. We do have a government organization called the Development Finance Corp that will also invest in these projects alongside the private enterprise. But we don't do really government-led lending alone without American companies. And that's probably one of the biggest differences. And I do think and this comes back to showing up, that we have to be here to know what those public tenders are, to know what the opportunities are. And I think we can be quite competitive going forward.
Okay.
But I think, one of the challenges Kenya has is, of course, and it's not unlike businesses, when interest rates were effectively zero, money was free. And all of a sudden, interest rates have went up, and I thought interest rates were going to go up 10 years ago. Honestly, it was shocking that we had almost 20 years of near zero rates. And of course, most of the debt in many countries and many businesses is floating rate. And so that creates, big challenges with, the cost of debt. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is the cost of debt has gone up quite dramatically from an interest rate perspective through no fault of the Kenyans.
But it appears also that there is a lot of time taken, to make a decision, and B, after that decision is made to mobilize. An example, an deal was inked between Kenya and the USA for the expansion of the highway between Nairobi and Mombasa. It has never started.
No. That deal actually never got signed.
Okay.
It was with Bechtel and the government of Kenya. And in the end, Bechtel decided not to do it. And, probably they couldn't come. I wasn't here, but I think probably they couldn't come to an agreement. So that's still outstanding. I hope that we have another American company that will be interested in that Mombasa to Nairobi road, because it's an important piece of infrastructure, particularly for the trucks and the goods movement. As you know, 80% of all the goods and services going to East Africa goes through the port of Mombasa.
Yep.
So that infrastructure, just like the port of LA and Long Beach or the port of Seattle, that infrastructure around the port is very important for economic growth and development.
How long do you give it before we start seeing something on the ground with whichever American company?
Yeah. Hard for me to say because there hasn't been a deal announced yet, but usually from deal announcement to breaking of ground shouldn't be that long, maybe a year or so, and then these things take a number of years to build. I mean, it's a long way from Mombasa to Nairobi, and there's a lot of things that need to be done.
Why would you say, for instance, that some of the world's biggest tech companies whose origins is in the U.S. have decided to come to Kenya? Set the headquarters here. Why Kenya?
I think that Kenya was the first country on the continent to have a very successful homegrown technology company. It's called M-Pesa. And M-Pesa took a hold here and is truly an extraordinary. M-Pesa, I think their last report was, they processed something like $360 billion worth of payments in 11 countries in Africa. And this revolutionized payments. When I was at eBay, I bought a company called PayPal. So I know digital payments very well. I've never seen anything quite like M-Pesa. I mean, do you know that something like 60% of the GDP of Kenya goes through M-Pesa?
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. You couldn't move in this country without M-Pesa.
No.
And so that was a very successful tech company, and that brought lots of engineers. Obviously, it was part of Safaricom, so there was homegrown engineering talent. And when you think about Silicon Savannah or Silicon Valley, there's three ingredients. One is a big tech company that is successful that then can seed talent to other smaller tech companies. In the Silicon Valley's perspective, it was HP. I mean, for many, many years, almost all the employees at these tech companies started their career at HP. And you're seeing that here in Kenya. They started at Safaricom or M-Pesa. They're now at startups. Second is the venture capital industry. You probably know that Kenya was the single largest destination for startup capital in 2023 on the continent. Yeah. More startup capital than Nigeria. Sorry about that. No, you're Nigeria.
Yes.
Yeah, you're Nigeria. More startup capital than Nigeria.
We shall revisit.
And more than South Africa, which is kind of amazing because those two economies are bigger.
Yeah.
And then finally is connectivity. And Kenya's making real progress on connectivity. And then last, good engineering schools. And Kenya has good engineering schools, whether it's University of Nairobi, whether it's Strathmore, Jomo Kenyatta, or I think a gem that hardly anyone talks about is Dekat University in Nyeri.
Right.
Dedan Kimathi University.
So, of course, with these relations, then we have to ask an immigration consular question.
Yeah.
And with the great relations, people are going to travel back and forth. So it's easier for Americans to come here than it is for Kenyans to go to the US. And one of the big questions is spousal visas for individuals who may be on the other side and are not able to get their visas for their spouses to join them. And we're not talking about months, we're talking about years for this to happen. What's the holdup?
Yeah. So when I got here, remember what happened during COVID is no one wanted to go anywhere. And the visa department, the consular department, is funded by visa fees. So during COVID, visa fees went to nothing. So there was no business. So all those consular officers went off into the other parts of the American government. I'm very pleased that we didn't lay anyone off, but they went and got other jobs. Then, when the demand started to rise again, we had to try to get all those people back. Do you remember when the airlines tried to get up and running? They had to bring the baggage handlers back and the flight attendants back and the pilots back. We had to find all these people to bring them back. When I got here, it was a 2-year wait for an interview.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of business process re-engineering. We got a bit more resources. I put out an all-points bulletin to the embassy. Anyone who's worked in consular in the last 5 years, it's your lucky day. You're coming back to consulate to, get this under control. And we brought that wait down to 2 years. Then everyone in Kenya figured out they could get visas again, so the demand went back up. We brought that down. And the place that we still are far behind is the spousal visas, and we're working on it. I think there will be good resolution by the end of the year. But I feel badly about the fact that many of these spouses have been separated, families have been separated, and so we're working to get, you probably know there's 8 different kinds of visas to go to the United States. We've made progress on many of them, and we've made progress on that, but not enough.
So are we saying that it is a timing issue?
Yes.
As opposed to a refusal issue?
Oh, it's a timing issue.
Okay.
I mean, we do refuse people for visas for
yes.
very, very good reasons, but that's not the major problem here. It's actually a resource and a processing time issue.
So what would you say to the folks who are waiting and saying, okay, well, it's been 3 years,
Hang in there. We're working on it. We're working on it, and I want to resolve it as fast as we can.
Do you think the cost for an American visa is justified?
I don't set those prices, and so it's hard for me to know. They do support, those visa fees do support a very large organization and a processing capability. And I don't think I had an appreciation as a private American citizen not working in the State Department of the very good work that the Consular Department does. It's a very difficult job. And, you're seeing hundreds of people a day, you're trying to make decisions, and you're very aware of the cost of being wrong. The cost of being wrong and letting in, for example, the 9/11 hijackers. It's a big problem. And so you have to be very thoughtful about, trying to do the right thing, to be fair to people, to be responsive, to be customer service oriented. At the same time, you have to be very thoughtful about who you let in.
Because what we hear, very many complaints of people who have applied for an American visa.
Yeah.
They have endured the long wait. Finally, they get the day to go to the embassy. And just few minutes, they get the wrong slip.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Their money, their time gone.
Yes.
Without adequate explanation as to why they're not getting the visa.
Yeah.
So what do they need to improve on? So one of the issues is there room for an explanation, a better explanation instead of just giving somebody a slip?
Yeah.
And 2, is there room for partial or full refund of the visa fee, application fee?
There isn't room for a partial or full refund on the visa fee. That's just not the way the thing works. But it was a good try. It was a good try. And I think we try to give people a bit of a sense. There are, laws and regulations about what we can say and what we can't say. And the only thing I can say to the Kenyans that are listening to this is I think we have a remarkable team in Consular who are doing the very best job they can. Still under-resourced, by the way. The Consular Department globally is still under-resourced 2 years after COVID. That's how long it takes to train and get all these people back. I think we're making big progress. Is it where we all want it to be? Not yet, but I think we're making real progress. And I think most Kenyans, at least when I'm around and about, they say, well, at least I was able to get an interview, in a couple of months.
Yeah. Ambassador, I know your team is saying that you have very many other engagements,
Yes.
but just a couple of minutes as we ask the important questions. You mentioned that one of the things that's attracting American investors into Kenya is our power mix. We are going to be 100% green energy. This is the president's
Correct.
commitment. We already passed 90%.
Yeah.
Okay. Are American companies investing in energy sector in Kenya?
Yes.
In what areas?
Yes. So the Capetto wind farm was just got a second round of financing by one very big American PE company, private equity company. And the Capetto, not Capetto, Turkana wind farm, the Turkana wind farm.
Lake Turkana wind.
The wind farm up there, I think provides about 20% of all electricity in Kenya. And quite good rates. Geothermal, there's going to be, I think, a number of big data centers built in Naivasha or Nakuru because they're so close to, very cost-effective, 5 cents a kilowatt hour geothermal. And then solar. The cost of solar panels is coming down dramatically. And there's many off-grid companies in Kenya that provide solar power to your house, that are off-grid, and those are growing very, very fast. And a lot of people are putting in their own solar panels to reduce the cost of electricity to their home or their business.
Hydrogen.
hydrogen. So green ammonia is taking off here. There's a company called Talus that makes green ammonia that is then utilized for fertilizer. So that is a small but growing industry. And beyond green hydrogen and ammonia, there's I think big potential here, but it's very, very nascent.
Okay. Ambassador Meg Whitman, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And it's been, well, we'd have wanted to stay with you until the top of the hour. Can you? It's just 10 minutes.
I think I probably need to go. I have this little thing called the state dinner that needs
just a small thing.
This needs a few more attention on both sides of the Atlantic.
We will send you from here with potatoes, with tomatoes, with onions, with carrots, with everything. We know what our Kenyans eat.
Yes.
Okay, so we just send
so
you
I'll
the
take
food.
it with me.
And I'm sure you will not have a problem passing through the airport.
Into the States.
Right.
Thank you
very
very
much.
for joining
Nice
us.
to see you all. Appreciate it.
Your final message to Kenyans as we mark these 60 years of, diplomatic relations, Kenya and America, and what Kenya has been viewing America to be, and what America has been viewing Kenya as.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a great partnership, and there's lots more ahead. I think lots of economic growth and development, lots of joint efforts on regional peace and security and on healthcare. Tuberculosis still needs work. Malaria still needs work. So I think lots of things ahead, and it's built on, I think, fundamental trust and a fundamental good relationship between the American people and the people of Kenya. And thanks to the people of Kenya for the nice, warm welcome that I've gotten since I've been here. I really appreciate that.
Margaret Meg Whitman is the U.S. ambassador to Kenya and Kenya's chief marketing officer to the USA. She's been our guest this morning as she prepares for this state visit by Kenya President William Ruto to the USA. You didn't tell us actually what's the program. So the
Well,
president
it's a
gets
long
there,
program. The
apart from the dinner.
Yeah.
What
Well,
else?
the president's going to Atlanta for 2 days.
What's that?
Before Atlanta, and there's a number of different engagements in Atlanta. Atlanta is a very big American city that is now home to a very high percentage of Fortune 500 companies. Whether it's agriculture, it's a technology hub, it's a creative economy hub. A lot of the Los Angeles film, television, music has moved to Atlanta. So Atlanta is a very vibrant part of the country. So we thought it would be great to go there. And then on Wednesday, we go up to D.C., and there's a whole set of events there that I'm sure we'll share with you. I'm sure you're sending someone or some people to follow the state visit, yeah?
Yes.
An entire battalion. Well, thank you.
We'll
very
take
much for
good care of you.
Asante sana.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.